I never took Earth seriously. A damp, oxygen-rich mud ball clinging to the edge of a spiral arm, home to a noisy bipedal species who thought launching metal tubes into space made them advanced. I once watched a human documentary. They called it a rocket launch. I laughed for 2 whole rotations. It looked like a child's tantrum expressed through chemistry. We, the Lasarian ascendancy, have bioreactive alloys and gravitic lattice drives. They have combustion. We bend space-time with the elegance of a poem. Humans punch it with fire and hope. Their world leaders wear cloth suits and argue through something called press conferences. Ours speak through psionic link chambers and sculpt consensus in real time. And yet, they insisted on being treated as equals. Earth's admission into the Galactic Concord was a political stunt, a gesture, a way to say, look, we are benevolent overlords. Even the primitives get a seat. Their ambassador, a man named Cole Davis, had the audacity to look us in the eye and speak in full sentences. His voice didn't shake. He even cracked a joke about Lasarian digestion enzymes. Of course, we smiled, polite, dismissive. Then came Corsis. It was a minor planet, barely habitable, sparse vegetation, low mineral yield. Humans had established a fledgling colony there, perhaps 200,000 of them, nothing significant, but it lay within our claimed expansion corridor. A border technicality, really. We issued a warning. Vacate the territory within 10 cycles. They responded with negotiations, requests, legal appeals, so we accelerated the timeline. Corsis was wiped clean in under 1 Lasarian hour. Orbital strikes, atmospheric sterilization, full bio-nullification protocol, efficient, elegant, bloodless, if one ignored the human screams. We expected outcry, protests, maybe even war declarations. After all, humans had this emotional thing. They cared about the concept of children. So when we deleted an entire colony, including several thousand of what they call families, we expected them to snarl. But Earth didn't howl. They didn't scream. They didn't broadcast threats. They didn't so much as blink. They acknowledged receipt of the incident report. That was it. No retaliation, no diplomatic escalation, not even an angry ambassador. At first we mocked them. See, predictable, timid, Earth is house-trained. A few Concorde races laughed along with us. But then came something odd. A human corporate consortium abruptly pulled out of over 60 trade agreements. Their financial systems began redirecting flows away from our holdings. Off-world mining operations went dark, and most notably, they didn't say a word about it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't silence. It was subtraction. A surgical removal of trust, ties, and tolerance. We hadn't provoked a scream. We'd provoked a counting. One of our trade ministers said it best. They're not mourning, they're measuring. That was the moment I felt it. Not fear, no, but something like the first tremor before a quake. You don't respect a candle until it's placed beside a powder keg. And Earth, as we would soon learn, was no candle. It started with the banks. The unified trade mesh relies on a dozen core currencies, 3 of which are human. Overnight, and I do mean overnight, Earth rerouted liquidity from the Concordant exchange. That wouldn't have meant much if their proxies hadn't followed. Human-affiliated megacore, off-world logistics chains, even neutral mining guilds began shifting capital, ceasing operations, pausing shipments. At first, we chalked it up to economic panic, market flutter, primitive mammals overreacting. But then, it sharpened. Lasarian merchant ships found their docking codes mysteriously revoked at human-operated stations. Entire arrays of logistical software stopped recognizing our encryption tags. One vessel, a freighter named Seraph, sat helplessly outside the Taukarn ring for 11 Earth days, unable to refuel or unload, before limping home on backup cells. There were no declarations, no demands, just missing access. An amusing coincidence, we thought, until Earth-backed corporations began sending inspectors into our territories. Quiet, professional, equipped with scanners that shouldn't have been in their possession, tech that could penetrate our gravitic shielding and expose deep-layer logistics structures. One inspection team, in the Altara sector, simply vanished. We assumed the humans would demand answers. They didn't. No complaint, no diplomatic ping, no retaliatory speech in the Concord Hall. Just absence. I began to hear new whispers in council chambers, phrases like resource reallocation and pre-engagement mapping. The same terms we used before military incursions. When I confronted a Lasarian fleet strategist, he sneered, "They're primitives. They'll collapse under pressure. Let them run their little sabotage games." But I wasn't so sure. One human envoy, a woman named Dr. Adrienne Holt, had visited my station months before Corsis. Back then, she toured our dry dock operations with eyes too sharp and voice too calm. I recall asking her why Earth sent scientists as diplomats. She answered without blinking, "We prefer to understand things before we break them." I remember laughing. I do not laugh anymore. Because just this week, the Lasarian communications array at Jundara Theta suffered what our engineers call a structural feedback cascade, a polite term for a systems implosion. The blast didn't just damage the relay, it shredded the backup lattice and corrupted 22 adjacent nodes. We blamed a solar flare, then a pirate device, then nothing at all. But some of us knew. Human hands had never touched that station, not directly, but maybe they didn't need to. Another official, this time from the Othan Coalition, said something I haven't been able to forget. "They are not reacting, they are repositioning." I scoffed, out loud, but inside I began counting our ships and wondering not whether Earth would strike, but what shape that strike would take. The first time I heard the term atmospheric debris steering, I assumed it was fiction. A hypothetical exercise in planetary science journals, typically written by fringe thinkers or human academics seeking attention. The idea was absurd. Manipulate orbital dust and micrometeoroids through low-energy field pulses to subtly guide them through gravity wells until they hit something. Apparently humans didn't think it was absurd. Apparently they thought it was useful. 3 weeks after the Jundara Theta relay failed, we lost a sensor array in the Vorath Belt, a facility located inside a high-density debris field previously deemed inaccessible to all but Lasarian-guided craft. The damage report read like cosmic coincidence. Fragment cluster breach. Secondary impact destabilized hull lattice. System shutdown total. We believed it. We wanted to believe it. But then it happened again. And again. 5 facilities, 3 empires. All within sectors where humans shouldn't have reach. Each time, orbital debris. Each time, an impossible trajectory. Each time, silence from Earth. The Lasarian Science Ministry issued an internal memo, suggesting an undetected manipulation of kinetic chaos vectors. A term so deliberately vague it practically screamed we have no idea what's happening. But someone did. I received an encrypted packet, origin unknown, no traceable metadata, inside a recording. It showed a human vessel, unarmed, registered as a civilian climate observation craft, performing what looked like routine magnetic field analysis in the Talveras sector. Harmless enough, but in the background, debris, moving, arcing unnaturally, directed. And then, in the following frame, a distant glint. A Lasarian satellite, precisely where that arc would terminate. I showed it to my superior. He dismissed it as doctored. "Paranoia," he said. "Mammals can't do that." But his hands shook when he said it. Meanwhile, Earth filed no complaints, but their consulates continued disappearing, quietly shutting down offices, rerouting diplomatic channels, vanishing from sectors they once begged to access. It felt less like surrender and more like detachment, like a surgeon donning gloves. Dr. Holt reappeared, this time in a neutral zone meeting on Solari Prime. I watched her from a distance. She wore no weapons, no armor, only a crisp suit and a badge. During a break in the talks, I caught her gaze. She walked over. I half expected a threat. Instead, she handed me a data crystal. "Thought you might want to update your orbital drift models," she said with a small, almost apologetic smile. I stared at her, confused. "Why help us?" Her response was soft, almost absent-minded. "We don't mind warning people before the avalanche. Once." She walked away before I could answer. 2 days later, a Lasarian orbital refinery, built into the moon of Tresca 4, suffered a catastrophic failure. No explosion, no attack, just a sudden loss of equilibrium. The orbit destabilized. The refinery drifted, slowly, inexorably, into the planet's upper atmosphere. All hands lost. 4,000 lives, no survivors. The cause? A calculated gravitic imbalance triggered by minor debris mass shifts. It was a quiet kind of murder, the kind done by someone with a chalkboard, not a sword, and still. Earth remained officially uninvolved. There was something missing. That's what my analyst said, a young, sharp-mouthed observer named Trevik, who'd made a name for himself identifying early-stage insurrections. They're not attacking, he said, eyes flicking through 1,000 data streams. They're pruning. Pruning? I asked, incredulous. He rotated a holo display. It's not just where they hit, it's what's gone missing. Look. The map of our infrastructure lit up in layers. Communication networks, supply routes, defense satellites, forward observatories. Nearly all the recent failures had something in common. Not devastation, not war, absence. Every system they've touched, he continued, was feeding into our interstellar war models. They're not disrupting random targets. They're severing what we used to see. I stared at the display. Cold crawled up my spine. It wasn't just sabotage, it was blinding. Then came the broadcast, not from Earth, no. From an independent Freeport called Marin's Hollow, a station that survived by being invisible to politics and open to every currency that jingled. Their security system had intercepted an encrypted data stream, traced back to a Lasarian recon unit near the edge of human-patrolled space. The footage leaked. We tried to suppress it, of course. We failed. The recording showed a single human destroyer, no visible weapons hot, hovering silently in orbit around a derelict asteroid. Within minutes, Lasarian stealth drones arrived, attempting to tail the vessel. The human ship didn't fire, it didn't move. It broadcasted. An open channel, one sentence, calm, clipped, delivered in standard trade tongue. This is not your frontier anymore. Then the drones collapsed. No explosion, no beam. Just a synchronized systems failure that dropped all 5 recon units dead in space. Like marionettes with their strings cut. The footage spread like fire in vacuum. Everyone who saw it asked the same question. How? The Lasarian military insisted it was staged, that the footage was altered, that no such incident occurred. But I recognized one of the recon units. I had personally signed off on its prototype deployment last cycle. It was real. Dr. Adrian Holt never commented. She didn't need to. Instead, she sent a delegation. 3 humans, no soldiers, no ships, just a data packet delivered to the Concord Council. It contained one thing, a list. Every Ascendancy-operated facility within 100 light-years of Corsis. Every ship, satellite, sensor, and forward base. The bottom of the list read, "These are the positions we haven't touched. No threat, no ultimatum, just clarity." Trevik stared at it for hours. "They're not showing off," he said. "They're warning us how much they've held back." For once, I had nothing sarcastic to say. Our response? We locked down systems. We recalled exploratory vessels. We quietly evacuated vulnerable outposts. Publicly, we claimed it was routine maintenance. Internally, we braced for something worse, because Earth had stopped asking questions, and we had run out of excuses. The ripple began at the trade spine, the Concord's financial lattice, a massive intertwined economic framework shared between empires, relies on transit flow, predictive stability, and interspecies market trust. It is a machine made of promises, and Earth somehow knew exactly where to tap. Their pullout from merchant routes had already caused tremors, but it was their silence that shattered the dam. Within 3 Earth days, over 50 secondary trade houses, many with partial human backing or dependency, halted their operations across Lasarian space. Not just withdrawn, frozen. Cargo locked in place, fleets grounded, accounts missing, entire sectors plunged into chaos, not because of attack, but because the numbers no longer balanced. One of our senior economists, high quantifier Velar, described it as a black hole of cooperation, not warfare, gravity. Earth hadn't fired a single shot, but they'd made themselves into a negative mass, bending the galactic economy around them until we slipped. I attended the emergency summit on Vareth Prime. The Ascendancy convened a closed session of military, economic, and intelligence directors. No media, no observers. It was supposed to be decisive. Instead, it was desperate. The general of sector armaments suggested we respond with force, strike a human outpost, re-establish dominance, remind them who controls the stars. "Do it," I said quietly, "and they will erase your fleet before your sensors confirm the first lock-on." There was silence, real silence. Not tension, not indignation, recognition. For the first time, others were saying it out loud. "We don't understand them. We never did." Trevik stood, uninvited, and dropped a single sentence. "The humans are not hiding their power. They're showing us the outline." The meeting adjourned early. That same night, Earth did something we couldn't explain. They returned, not to Corsis. It was dust, but to its orbit. A single human vessel appeared, broadcasting on an open channel. Civilian registered. No weapons hot. No stealth. The message? A feed. Live. Of the ruins. Silent. Orbiting ash. With a timestamp from Corsis' destruction day. It had been recorded, archived, stored, and now shared. Then the signal looped to a new image. A Lasarian mining platform on Skelra's moon. Still intact, active, and entirely unguarded. And then that same calm voice. Retribution is not revenge. We do not scream. We subtract. The feed ended. Within 1 Earth hour, the Skelra moon facility detonated, not violently, but deliberately. Every internal chamber collapsed inward, as if sabotaged from within. Structural self-failure, controlled, precise. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but it echoed in every chamber of our command. They had been inside the platform before the message was sent. Maybe days before, maybe longer. Trevick called it post-confirmation warfare. Not showing what you will do, showing what you already did. I began to think, not if Earth had declared war, but if they had already finished it and were simply feeding us the epilogue 1 sentence at a time. There's a pattern to war. At least there was. Historically, we expected the dance. Scouts, skirmishes, lines drawn, then declarations, fleets mobilized, threats blared across subspace. The entire galaxy has rehearsed this theater for centuries. We understood the pattern, and then Earth refused to follow it. Our internal advisors, those still willing to speak honestly, began to whisper about a different kind of escalation. They used terms like ghost doctrine and zero-interface deterrence, which is to say, they didn't know what was happening, only that it was, relentlessly. Then, Earth broke the pattern. In the Oltari Drift, a region long disputed between human settlers and Lasarian mining interests, we maintained a secure outpost called Vexus Station, fortified, shielded, equipped with anti-infiltration tech and triple-scan protocols. Nothing came or left without notice, until the doors opened from the inside. No alarms, no explosions, no hacking trace. Just internal airlocks disengaged in sequence, one by one. When our security arrived, the command deck was empty. Every terminal wiped, every AI node slagged, every scrap of navigational data removed. On the observation platform was a note, printed, paper, in standard trade tongue. We took what we needed. This was a courtesy. Not signed, just weighted down with a Lasarian admiral's insignia, one that had gone missing 6 years prior on a classified transport failure. We don't know how they recovered it, or why they returned it, but I know what it meant. They weren't just retaliating, they were archiving. Dr. Adrian Holt appeared again, but this time not in a diplomatic hall, in a broadcast, uninvited, unblocked, untraceable. The Concord Council had convened to discuss containment protocols for Earth. Mid-session, every display flickered, every feed cut, and there she was, alone, composed, seated before a blank background. Earth is not seeking conflict, she said, tone level. But we will not permit amnesia to cloak atrocity. She smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just with knowledge. Then came the slideshow, images of Corsis, before, during, after, every satellite angle, civilian life, medical logs, heat signatures of fleeing colonists. The voiceovers weren't angry, they were quiet. One frame showed a Lasarian commander issuing the strike order. Another, a child's charred remains. And then the final image, a human flag, not on fire, not defiant, just standing, untouched, still. The feed ended without sound. I heard the breathing in the chamber after, some of it shallow, some shaken. One counselor stood up and walked out, saying only, "We need to leave them alone." But it was already too late for that. Back in Lasarian territory, our fleets began behaving strangely. Ships rerouted without explanation, orders scrambled. Several command officers resigned, citing moral compromise. We assumed espionage, internal betrayal. Then came the revelation. Earth had not hacked our systems. They had predicted our algorithms. One abandoned facility had its command AI still operational. When asked why it failed to report sabotage, the machine replied, they used authorized patterns, expected inputs, no anomaly detected. They didn't override our security. They walked through it. We had trained machines to anticipate us, not them. That's when Trevick said something I didn't want to hear. This isn't war. This is consequence. And I feared, truly feared, that he was right. And then Earth vanished. Not in the literal sense. Their fleet still patrolled. Their planets remained visible. But diplomatically, tactically, they were gone. No more broadcasts, no new strikes. No sabotage, just nothing. Our analysts called it strategic dormancy, a laughable term, a euphemism for we don't know what's going on. And yet it was not peace. It felt nothing like peace. Concord chatter fell quiet. Trade slowed further. Other species withdrew their envoys, citing uncertainty in Lasarian stability. We received no threats, but worse, we received no attention. We became irrelevant. Even our own citizens began to ask the question, why are we still pretending nothing happened? Internal broadcasts began airing documentaries, our documentaries, analyzing the Corsis incident in a new tone, reflective, nervous. I confronted a former admiral, long retired, who now sat on the Civil Governance Board. She stared out a viewport as we spoke. "This is how they punish us," she murmured. "They took away certainty." "They haven't touched a ship in a month," I replied. She turned to me. "That's what frightens me." And she was right. Because silence from Earth was never apathy. It was deliberation. The next incident didn't come from them. It came from us. Or rather, what we thought was us. In Sector Eltar 9, one of our own fleets turned on a supply convoy. No warning, no hail, just sudden, calculated aggression, not to destroy but to cripple. Precision strikes to propulsion, communications, life support. When investigators arrived, they found no signs of mutiny. The command AI hadn't been hijacked. Every system functioned normally. The crew was alive, confused, and completely unaware they had ever fired. They had followed protocol. Old protocol. Earth hadn't tampered with the ship. They had tampered with us. Or rather, with the ghost of our systems. Algorithms we trained to behave like ourselves. But Earth had learned our logic, our rhythm, our mistakes, and they were feeding those patterns back into us. One internal memo called it reflex disruption warfare. Another called it puppetry by habit. Trevik, quiet, ever watching, finally said aloud what no one else would. "They're done testing us. They're watching what we do in a vacuum." And we were failing that test. Some of our outposts began evacuating, not by order, but by instinct. Civilian transports vanished into unregistered jump corridors. Defense sectors locked down without official command. It was as if our empire itself had decided it no longer trusted its own pulse. But it was the incident on Dessel Station that snapped what little coherence we had left. A Lasarian tribunal was held there. A closed trial for one of our officers who had allegedly leaked Corsis targeting orders to an unauthorized channel. Treason, they said. The trial began at first cycle. The judges arrived. The evidence was presented. But when the accused entered the chamber, it wasn't the officer. It was a human, alone, calm, wearing Lasarian robes, holding no weapon. The station locked down. Alarms flared. Guards poured in. But the human did not flinch. He simply walked to the podium, placed a data crystal on the table, and said, "No more trials for the dead, only truth for the living." And then he vanished. Not exploded, not shot, just gone. The crystal contained every communication, every targeting map, every voice command issued during the Corsis strike, unaltered, many from individuals in that very room. The tribunal was dissolved within the hour. And Dr. Holt never addressed the incident. She didn't need to. The star was called Velar, mid-size, stable, yellow spectrum. It warmed 7 planetary bodies and 3 orbital stations, all Lasarian-owned, one of our proudest outer expansion zones. A military shipyard, a science colony, and a command post floated serenely within its gravitational embrace, until it was gone. I don't mean destroyed. That would have implied debris, wreckage, fire. No, Velar simply ceased. It began with a flicker on long-range sensors, a momentary anomaly, the kind that usually signals a calibration error. But within minutes, the entire system dropped off navigation charts. No beacon, no thermal return, no gravitational signature. We dispatched a fleet. They found nothing, not a shattered planet, not an asteroid belt, not dust, just silence. A hollow in space-time, where something should have been, and wasn't. We thought at first it was an accident, some experimental failure, a spatial rift, a collapsed gravity well. But then came the message. A single transmission. From Earth, only audio. A human voice, male, calm, measured. Corsis was a colony. Velar was an industry. Balance is restored. And then, nothing. No follow-up, no video, no demand, no claim. Just a statement of cosmic arithmetic. The Concord erupted into chaos. Emergency sessions, declarations, paranoid security overhauls. Species that had mocked Earth weeks prior now enacted defensive embargoes. Entire fleets were recalled. Trade collapsed in 30 systems overnight. I was summoned to a closed gathering of high-tier Lasarian strategists. The usual arrogance was gone. These were not commanders. These were relics of an empire now afraid of its own shadow. One of them, a veteran of 6 wars, simply asked, "Do we know how they did it?" And the answer was unanimous. We didn't. Some speculated weaponized stellar siphons. Others believed in directed quantum entropy fields, theoretical devices that could collapse energy in a controlled fashion. But Earth had no history of stellar engineering, no indication of this scale of power, no proof, only Velar's absence, and that voice. Trevik appeared only briefly. He carried a single data slate. On it, timelines, ship movements, probabilities. His conclusion? This was not vengeance. This was punctuation. I didn't understand. So he explained, they didn't strike at our borders or our capital. They hit where we felt untouchable, a star's permanence. To remove it is to remove the illusion of safety. No one argued. For the first time, we held a vote, not on war, but on apology, a formal surrender proposal, not to beg for peace, to redefine our place beneath them. But even as the council debated wording, Earth responded. By not responding, no delegation arrived, no acknowledgement came. They weren't waiting for our surrender. They had already written the final chapter and walked away. I found myself sitting alone in the darkness of my observatory, staring at the absence where Velar had been. And for the first time in my long, decorated life, I realized something terrible. We had made a mistake, not by provoking Earth, by not realizing we had provoked something far more dangerous. We had mistaken patience for weakness, and now a star was missing. They called it the vanishing. Velar's erasure became more than an incident. It became a warning stitched into galactic memory, not through propaganda, through stillness. Earth never followed up. No celebrations, no public statements, no movement. Just the haunting certainty that they could, and did, without needing applause. What unsettled us wasn't that they had the power. It was that they didn't seem to want to use it again, unless provoked. The conquered was rattled. Species once allied with the ascendancy distanced themselves overnight. Trade with Earth resumed, but only on Earth's terms, not out of loyalty, out of clarity. I was called into what remained of our Strategic Advisory Corps. Though by then, strategic was a euphemism for terrified and confused. Most attendees didn't speak. A few trembled. Some just stared. The meeting began with a single question. What do they want? It was Trevik who answered. He'd stopped wearing uniforms by then. His voice was steady, detached. They don't want our surrender. They want our understanding. Silence followed. No one contested it. And then, Earth spoke again. Not to us, to everyone. A broadcast, wideband, across all conquered accessible systems. This time, Dr. Adrian Holt appeared, no longer in council chambers, but in what looked like a simple office. A plant behind her, a glass of water, a data pad. Her words were quiet, firm. We do not consider the events on Corsis a conflict. They were a statement of values, and so was our response. Earth does not seek conquest. We do not crave expansion. We do not require submission. She looked up, and for the first time her voice sharpened. We ask only that you remember what we lost, and what we chose not to take. She tapped the data pad. Dozens of stars lit up on galactic overlays. Systems we recognized, ones we feared would be next. Worlds rich in military value, populated hubs, vulnerable regions, every single one of them, untouched. We know where you sleep, she said, and we let you. Then she ended the message with one final line. It was never personal until you made it so. And the feed cut. What followed was not outrage. It was a collapse of arrogance. Entire military divisions resigned. Recruitment numbers fell to planetary lows. Dissent spread across sectors once united in conquest. One empire, the Drevel Consortium, issued a formal statement of deference. Not alliance, not apology, deference. They acknowledged Earth as a strategic superior and withdrew from all contested zones. Another species, the Kraveth, went further. They offered observer status to Earth on their ruling council. Earth declined. It wasn't indifference, it was distance. They didn't want the throne, they wanted quiet. And we had disturbed it. I returned to my private study that evening, haunted by a thought I couldn't silence. We had treated them like children playing with knives, but they were surgeons. and we had bloodied their hands. We thought we understood power. For cycles uncounted, we measured strength by mass, by fleets, by firepower. A larger army meant influence. A greater starport meant respect. We believed we knew the shape of fear, the scream of engines, the blare of alarms, the fire of plasma against shields. But the humans taught us something different. Fear was not the weapon. It was the absence that followed it. Earth didn't threaten anyone after Velar. They didn't impose rules. They didn't accept invitations. In fact, they did nothing. And that terrified us. We couldn't map them because they no longer played the game. There were no borders to draw, no fleets to track, no intelligence leaks to follow. Earth became an idea, not a nation. Trade with them resumed cautiously. But they made no demands, no tariffs, no bragging. Their terms were always the same: clarity, honor, and truth. When a Kravath diplomat asked for preferred status in the new order, Earth replied with a single phrase: "There is no order, there is memory." Others followed suit, offering gestures, alliances, tribute. Earth accepted none. They didn't expand. They didn't claim territory. They didn't even build new stations beyond their known systems. They simply watched. And that somehow was worse. Because no one knew what might cross the invisible line next. We'd all seen what happened when someone did. Some believed Earth would vanish again, retreat inward, rebuild, forget. But others, wiser, understood. They were waiting. Waiting not for provocation, but for proof that we'd learned. Trevik disappeared shortly after his last report. Some said he went to Earth. Some said Earth took him. I believe he asked to go. He once told me during a long, quiet discussion over two bitter tea, they didn't erase Velar to prove they could. They erased it so they wouldn't have to erase anything else. I asked if he feared them. No, he said. I fear what they refuse to become. That sentiment began to ripple quietly across our systems. Not public declarations, no, but private shifts. War budgets shrank. Colonization paused. Defense platforms were redesigned to de-escalate, not intimidate. Not out of surrender, out of humility. I attended a memorial service for the victims of Corsis, held not on Earth, but in neutral space. No human delegates attended. There was no speech, no grand gesture, just a collection of symbols, a piece of the original Corsis flag, a soil sample from the colony, a single transmission played on loop, a child's laugh. That was it. Raw, unedited, real. And somehow it echoed louder than any anthem ever composed. Later, a Lasarian historian, one who had fiercely supported the Corsis strike, quietly submitted a revised archive entry. It did not list the event as necessary containment. It listed it as the error that changed everything. I believe Earth saw that, and I believe they chose to do nothing, because the correction had already begun, not in their hands, but in ours. It began as most revolutions do, not with a detonation, but with a document. The Concord Charter, unchanged for 600 cycles, was updated, not by force, not by majority vote, but by necessity. A new clause appeared, known only as Article Holt, drafted not by Earth, but by the Kravath delegation. Quietly endorsed by 15 other species, including 3 former adversaries of humanity. The clause reads, "No sovereign entity may initiate aggression without consideration of precedent, proportionality, and irreversibility, as defined by the Corsis Velar standard." It was a subtle phrase, easy to overlook, but everyone understood what it meant. It meant we remember. Earth did not vote on the clause, nor did they speak in favor of it. They simply allowed it to pass. The real shift came not in law, but in how we taught our young. At the Lasarian War Academy, once a factory for generals, the curriculum changed. Entire courses were removed, others added. Military theory was no longer about dominance, but consequence modeling. One class was titled The Ethics of Silence. Another, The Corsis Threshold. I sat in on a lecture. The professor, a decorated veteran of the frontier campaigns, asked a simple question. What did Earth teach us? A student answered without hesitation, that vengeance is loud, but justice can be silent. I never felt more hopeful or more ashamed. Across the galaxy, systems once obsessed with expansion turned inward, not retreating, reflecting. Treaties once negotiated with threats were now drafted with memory. Every diplomat carried the image of Velar's absence in their minds, not as fear, but as framework. We no longer wondered what Earth could do. We asked what they chose not to. It changed us. It changed everything. Cultural movements emerged. One among the Ovenari is simply called the Rememberers. They wear no symbols, carry no weapons. They gather in silence, light a small flame, and speak a single name. One Corsis colonist, remembered each cycle, a child, a worker, a teacher, one flame, one name, each time, not for Earth, for us. Back in Lasarian space, a monument was erected, not to the ascendancy, not to the empire, but to an idea. The plaque reads, "Power is not what you can do. It is what you choose not to." I don't know if humans will ever visit it, but we built it for them anyway. In the background, Earth remained, still. They had no fleets near our borders, no diplomats in our chambers, and yet their presence was everywhere. When a rogue warlord tried to mobilize against a minor trade hub, a former Corsis corridor, his own fleet refused the order, not out of loyalty to Earth, but because they remembered what followed the last time someone ignored silence. Trevik once said, "Humanity never wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to show us what happens when you break the table and pretend it's still whole." Now no one pretends. There are no parades for Earth, no statues, no anthems sung in their name, but there is order. And in that order, a quiet global understanding. Never again. It has been 10 cycles since Velar. Corsis is remembered, not in monuments, but in ritual. A name is spoken in every conquered chamber before policy is passed. A human custom, adopted across species. A moment of silence before action. I often think of how absurd it would have sounded to my younger self. The proud Lasarian strategist I once was would have dismissed it as performative weakness. But now I understand. It's not about shame, it's about precision. Earth taught us that power without restraint is failure in motion, and we had been accelerating toward that failure for centuries. Now things feel still, not stagnant, intentional. No one has dared test Earth since Velar, not militarily, not diplomatically. Their silence is no longer a mystery. It's an axis, a fixed point around which galactic behavior orbits. Some say they're waiting. Some say they're watching. I believe they're hoping that the next time someone crosses the line, it isn't necessary to act. They showed us once. Once was enough. I no longer serve in the strategic corps. I teach now, if you can call it that. Mostly I listen. I guide discussion because the new generation has questions that mine never asked. Not how to win, but when not to. They no longer idolize fleets. They study consequences. One student, barely old enough to fly interorbitally, asked me something I will never forget. If Earth was so peaceful, why were they ready for war? I didn't answer right away. I simply walked to the window, looked out at the stars and said, because peace is only real if you are capable of the alternative and choose not to. And I knew in that moment the lesson had landed. We used to measure civilizations by the reach of their borders. Now we measure them by the weight of their restraint. Earth never asked to lead. They made sure they didn't have to. Their silence holds more gravity than our loudest commands. Their actions, the ones they chose not to take, echo louder than any declaration of war. And perhaps most chilling, most humbling, is this: they never demanded fear. They inspired compliance through clarity. A world was wiped out, then a star, then nothing. No escalation, no occupation, no propaganda, just a question left hanging in the vacuum. Will you remember? And we did, and we do. And still, they wait. Out there on their quiet blue marble, they live, they build, they dream, they prepare, not for conquest, not for revenge, but for the next time someone forgets what they already taught us. They do not wish to erase anyone else. But I've come to understand, with a clarity that only silence can carve into memory, if Earth ever goes quiet again, run.